Hey friends, this is day 32 of Russian war against Ukraine. Over the last 4 days, a lot of things had happened, so I'll try to be brief, but we're going to talk about four things. Number one, we're going to talk about the three simultaneous summits that happened last Thursday, NATO, G7, and EU, I believe. Second, we're going to talk about President Biden's involvement, his thoughts on the summit, but also his meeting with the troops in Poland and as well as Ukrainian refugees. We're going to talk about how Russian narrative is currently changing, their tactics change, and there's quite a bit of sinister motivation there going on. And then finally, I'll tell you about Zelenskyy giving an interview to Russian independent journalists and what happened with that, because of course there's drama. So first of all, the most important thing that had happened last week was Thursday, when three simultaneous summits were going on. The most important and significant one of them, I believe, was the NATO summit. They were planning the next 5 years of the alliance and trying to project what's going to happen in Europe and around the world. And the reason they chose 5 years is because we can extrapolate that they believe that the conflict in Ukraine will last 4 or 5 years. Doesn't mean that the active fighting is going to go on for 5 years, but this means that this current crisis, until it gets back to some kind of a normal, some kind of stable situation, will take about 5 years. So the conclusions of that are not here nor there. They did sort of come up with a resolution that they will provide Ukraine any weaponry it needs for winning, and that includes heavy weaponry, anti-air systems, anti-naval, maybe anti-tank. As you know, so far the help that Ukraine has been getting from the West was mostly light weaponry, so like javelins, stingers. These are shoulder mounted and they are targeted towards guerrilla warfare. And the reason for that is because there's some leaked information that Mark Milley given this briefing to the United States government, that his ministry believes that Ukraine will not stand more than 3 days and Russia will invade, they will take Kiev. So it would be appropriate to provide Ukrainian resistance with light weaponry. That's why you see a lot of help from all these countries that are either handheld weapons, shoulder mounted. This is all targeted towards guerrilla warfare. But now that they're seeing that Ukraine is not folding, that Ukraine is actually giving something back or trying to counterattacking on several directions, they are wanting to provide us with heavy weaponry, and this will include, as I said, anti-air, anti-tank, anti-naval. You may have heard over the weekend that Ukrainian forces, we don't know how exactly, but had struck a Russian trooper carrier ship, and there were 3 of them. One was hit and went down. Others caught fire. We don't know how it happened, but that was a proof that Ukrainian army can do these kinds of operations. So this is very good. We're hoping for the serious S-200 and S-300 anti-air systems, which will allow us to reach and down planes from higher altitudes, because the weaponry that we have currently, javelins, they only go up to, I think, 5 miles in distance. So these systems, the S-200, S-300, will give us a lot more range towards that. But this was one resolution that will help Ukraine with heavy weaponry, and another one was that we will not, as NATO, take any steps to escalate the war, the relationships with Russia. And what is interesting about that is, I'll also mention this further, is that we see that Russia is finding reasons to use their nuclear threat for smaller and smaller reasons, for smaller causes, which is another dynamic that we have to look at. All right, so let's zoom in on what President Biden was doing. He did attend the summits, and then he went to Poland, met with the troops and Ukrainian refugees. And from what we're told by analysts is that it was a highly emotional experience for him to see the refugees, and he did cite a girl that was telling him about the war in Ukraine. So he was obviously moved by that. He did a speech in front of the Polish parliament, which I think they call Sejm, and his speech was pretty standard. He did condemn a lot of what Putin was doing. He did address the Russian people and said, this is we're all in this together, for the lack of a better word. I think COVID kind of stole that one, but he said that this is a problem we need to solve all together. Overall, good speech, and I think it was one of his most important ones in his career generally, and a lot of journalists actually say that, and I agree with them. And then, of course, the phrase that everybody's talking about at the end, he sort of bursted out with, "For God's sake, this man cannot stay in power." This was not on his speech. This was not a teleprompter, and then I believe it was Zelenskiy, like 5 minutes later, who was trying to correct him and clean that up. He was not really calling for the regime change in Russia. And then the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, said something similar: we should not escalate. I think the secretary of commissioner of NATO, what was his name, Stoltenberg, immediately said something corrective. And you could take this many different ways, what he said, but I think what happened was that at the end of his programmed speech, which was good, his speechwriter is good, he sort of had an outburst of authentic Biden. That's what he saw. That was his reaction to what he saw and experienced with Ukrainian refugees. For God's sake, this man cannot stay in power. I think this is great. This is akin of what Reagan was saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. This was akin to Kennedy going to Germany and saying something, I'm the Berliner. And this is him reacting to what he saw. And I think, it's an effect that a lot of people would have. The further away you are from the conflict, the more light or fictitious or whatever it looks to you. But then when you actually get down to it, you become more, when you get close to it, you become more radicalized, and radicalized in a good sense, because you're seeing that this should not happen in the world that we want to believe we live in. So in that sense, I think it was great that he said that. Of course, this put him in hot water, and as I said, a lot of his fellow counterparts tried to correct what he was saying, and which, of course, I think is cowardly. And we can make another conclusion out of this, which is now even saying stuff like this will get you in trouble, will get you some kind of nuclear threat. Because after this, the press secretary of Putin, Peskov, he did come out and say, well, first of all, Russian people elect their president, not Biden, which is, of course, bullshit. Russian people don't elect jack shit. But also he started talking about, well, in our strategy of security of Russia, we do not have to be attacked. One of the points that we have is that if we cannot win a war in a conventional military sense, we can use tactical nuclear weapons, or even strategic nuclear weapons. Which of course he meant. What he meant by that is that if you keep talking smack about us, we will use that. And as you see, this is what I've been saying from the beginning, which is not to brag, but if you give Putin a way in, if you let Putin know what you're afraid of, he's going to use it all the way until he pushes you to where he wants you. And now even saying something radical about Putin will get you a threat of nuclear annihilation, which will mean that it will continue to a point where you cannot even think anything, because Putin will strike you down with nuclear weapons. So this problem has to be dealt with. And maybe I'll do a video on what I gather is the risk of nuclear war, because the more and more I listen to analysts, I listen to Putin's rhetoric, I don't think he's going to use it. I think he's bluffing, and there's a number of reasons why I think that. Let me know if that's something you'll be interested in hearing. These are not my thoughts, but this is what I gather from different sources and from different analysts. But this is actually good news. I don't think he's gonna do that. He wants people to think that he's crazy. He wants the other countries to think, well, you have nuclear weapons, I have nuclear weapons, but the difference between you and me is that you're reluctant to use it, but I will do it. I'm crazy. I have nothing to lose, and that's sort of his real weapon. Okay, so let's talk about how Russian tactics are changing. So Russians are now, I should say Russian government, because the Russians is different. Russian government is now well aware they cannot overtake Ukraine. They cannot occupy the cities that they wanted to. So now through their press secretaries, they're trying to make it look like, well, we weren't, it was never our goal to occupy Ukraine. We didn't want to take Kyiv. All we were there for is to protect Donbass. And Donbass are these two eastern regions that they had occupied in 2014. Of course, this whole narrative is BS, because Putin himself at the beginning of the war on the 23rd, or when was it, the 22nd, when he was giving his speech, he said that the two reasons we're attacking Ukraine or doing this special military operation is, number one, demilitarization of Ukraine, which means that they want to control how much military we have, what kind of systems we use, and all that kind of stuff. And then the reason number one is denazification, which means that, Ukraine was overtaken by a Nazi government, and we have to make sure we denazify Ukraine, which basically means installing the puppet government of their own in Ukraine. So now their ambitions are a lot more modest. They're saying we're gonna protect Donbass, and this is one of the reasons why we're seeing they're trying to level Mariupol to the ground. So the news on that is that in Kyiv, we're seeing Ukrainian army counterattack. So we're pushing out Russians, which is indeed very good news. But they're concentrating their forces on Mariupol and on Donetsk and Lugansk, which are those two eastern regions. And the spokesman for Ukrainian defense, Alexei Arestovich, he was not so optimistic about our chances to keep Mariupol. First of all, it's 90% destroyed. Like the 90% of buildings in Mariupol are now destroyed. That some of them may still be standing out of the 90%, but they're unlivable. They would go down at any point. They have to be destroyed and built up again after the war is over and after we win. But Arestovich is saying that it's a possibility that Russians might take Mariupol because they have concentrated on it and they need some kind of a bargaining position at the negotiation table, which will happen on the 28th and 29th in Turkey, I believe. Yes, it was in Turkey. So what they're going to try to do is come into Mariupol, occupy Mariupol, and then go to the negotiations and say, well, unless you give us what we want, we will do this to every other city. We will level them to the ground. We'll occupy them, and then you will have nowhere to go. So that's what Russia does. Unfortunately, it's barbaric. It's inhumane. They don't care about any civilians they kill. They don't even care about their own soldiers. So they either burn them with crematoriums, with moving crematoriums on the field, or just leave them there. Because by the videos we're seeing in our Ukrainian raw news channels, or by testimony of many of Ukrainian soldiers, the bodies of Russian soldiers are just like there. Nobody wants them. They serve as they serve to help the grass grow, I guess. So that's what Russia is. As we said, with their blitzkrieg being sabotaged by Ukrainian forces, they now are becoming more and more radical because they need some kind of a win. So Putin needs to reframe anything that happened on the battlefield as a win. So they will not stop before anything. Okay, so that's how the Russian narrative is changing. And of course, nobody in the world but their own internal market believes this bullshit. Okay, Zelensky gave an interview to Russian independent media, which is interesting because you see a difference in how West approaches their government and how Russia approaches their government. Nobody has seen Putin in a really long time, apart from his rally in that stadium in Moscow, to which he was flown in, and then as soon as it was done, they took him out with a large security zone around him. On the other hand, you see people like President Biden who did stand in front of a large crowd in Warsaw, and he was not afraid of anything. We see him meeting his troops. We see him meeting Ukrainian refugees. He's a lot more personable. Same thing with Zelensky when he was giving this interview. First of all, these were Russian journalists. Of course, they were not state media, state-controlled media. They were independent journalists. And this interview was banned in Russia, and only one independent media source by the name of Medusa, they only published it because all of their journalists, or at least the editor-in-chief, are, I think, in one of the Baltic countries. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do that. A great conversation. Zelensky was not speaking from a teleprompter or anything. Very impromptu, very sincere, very personable. He did speak with the journalists as there were his buddies, which I thought was a great move. He did talk a little bit from his heart. He did talk a little bit about the real facts, the facts that we do not like to see. So it's obvious that it was not propaganda. He was not trying to influence any Russian people through these journalists, but he was being sincere. He did say that I think we're gonna lose here. I don't think we're gonna restore relationships with regular Russian people for a long time because of what you guys did, and because Russian people support what Putin is doing so much. So a great interview. One of the journalists said an interesting thing, and I think Zelensky knew this, but I didn't, which is in many of the footage that you see on tanks and the personnel carriers and whatnot, you will see either a letter V or a letter Z. In fact, letter Z has become the symbol of this war for Russians, and they're proudly displaying them they draw them on their own cars. They have apparel with letter Z. So, and the letters V and Z are meant to represent Vladimir Zelenskiy. So his name, his last name, which tells us how much of a problem Zelensky is personally for Kremlin. And and Zelensky, he played it off and said, yeah, I knew about this, and I know they're trying to get rid of me. They were trying to get rid of me political ways, and it turns out that the way Russians did this, starting back in 2010s, they spent a couple of $1 billion trying to build an agent network around Ukraine, basically meaning trying to turn some of prominent Ukrainian citizens into Russian spies, some of the members of parliament, and local authorities to them. And thank God it didn't turn out, because it turns out the Ukrainians took the money but never did anything. But one of the ways that they tried to do that was to control local government, and then when it came to trickle up to with elections to the parliament, their forces will be in parliament. So that was the political way of trying to delegitimize Zelensky and our previous president. So that had not worked because Ukrainians basically cheated them, cheated the Russian agents. Russian spies, but the second way is physically removing them. There has been over 10, by Russian-owned media admission, 10 special groups that were sent to Kiev to try to take Zelensky and his immediate government out. All of those were not successful, obviously. Another important thing that was said at this interview is that Zelensky said, I will hold a referendum on some of the main negotiating positions in this war. And we knew about the referendum maybe a week, 10 days before this, but we didn't know what the questions were. So he cleared it up, and he said that the remaining negotiating points that Ukrainian side is willing to talk about are the security guarantees that Ukraine will not attack Russia, which, I mean, duh. I mean, Ukraine was never going to do that anyway. And then secondly is the independent or non-bloc status of Ukraine, which means that Ukraine promises not to join NATO in the future, which was one of the reasons, declared reasons Putin cited when he started this war. And the reason that the non-bloc status is an easy one for us is because NATO is by now outright said that we will not accept Ukraine in the alliance. And Zelensky also about a week ago said that we just have to accept this fact that we're not going to be in NATO, which is interesting because for 10 years, since I think 2008, when the first consultative session was held, they were sort of stringing Ukraine along and saying, yeah, maybe we'll accept you, but you have to qualify certain criteria, and then we will see. So in one of the recent appeals that Zelensky made to NATO, I think the last point he said, please stop saying that Ukrainian army does not qualify for the NATO criteria. And what he meant by that was that out of all armies of NATO, right now we're the only one who qualifies for the defensive alliance against what was created against Soviet Union, because we're actually fighting them, we're actually holding them in their positions and in some ways pushing them back. So you can see that he was angry about that, and it's easy to see why. I actually completely agree with him. So those two things are still on the negotiating table. What it's not on the negotiating table, and he also made that clear, is that Crimea is Ukrainian, and the eastern parts, the Donetsk and Luhansk areas, are Ukrainian regions. So great point on that, and he keeps that firm. And we'll see what happens with the referendum, but it was definitely a signal to the other side about negotiations. Like, we're ready to talk peace, we're ready to talk about reasonable agreements. Although to my non-military mind, I'm like, what the fuck? You attacked us, and now we have to negotiate with you. But obviously, to make peace as soon as possible, we'll have to negotiate. So great interview with him, and I think he's the best president we had so far. He's doing the right thing because he comes from media. He knows how to work public relations. So he talks to Russians, he talks to the West, and he always does this correctly. So good guy, and I'm hoping that him being sort of upfront and always visible, always communicating. He does twice a day. He records videos for Ukrainians talking about the war, what were successes, what were the undesirable events that happen, and he also encourages people. So I think his tactic is very good. All right, so all in all, next couple of weeks should be tumultuous. We're gonna see Russians try to do everything they can to take Mariupol. We're gonna see NATO in their decisions. Are they really gonna give us heavy weaponry, or are we actually going to be able to turn this situation around in the sky? So those are going to be important questions, and I will keep an eye on it, and I will tell you how it goes. Thank you, friends, so much. I appreciate your support and you sharing my content. And let me know if there are any topics that you'd like me to go deeper in. I would be happy to do that. Also, if you have questions about anything that's going on, I'd be happy to answer those in my next video. All right, bye.